The Oregon Council for the Humanities always likes their own feedback. So if you will fill out one of these in addition to the other one that I passed around, that will be our evaluation, but this will be the evaluation of today's program. They like that kind of feedback, and we are required to send that back to them, so I'll pass this one around also. I guess you can fill it out now, but probably better if you wait till that. And I do want to say once again that this is the last year of the Chautauqua programs, so visiting professors probably not going to happen again. Speakers addressing a particular subject not going to happen. It's morphing into something called the Conversation Project, and it's talking about political issues, cultural issues, and historical things may just possibly sneak in under that, but the whole format is not a presentation and then question and answer kind of format. It's initiate a conversation and let all kinds of people gather around the table and talk. That really doesn't lend itself quite to the types of things that we do on this series. So,
is it all about money, or are they just simply something different?
Well, probably both. Probably both. There's a lot of cutbacks in all kinds of programs, and so that probably is part of that. But they have come to the conclusion that after many years, it's run its course, and they're switching. So you might want to say something in your evaluation down at the bottom about how you appreciate the Chautauqua programs and wish they'd come back in some format that really addresses the rich the historical issues, the cultural things that we have shared in these kinds of programs, and have appreciated so much having that help of well-prepared speakers and excellent programs furnished by the Oregon Council for the Humanities. Curt, I passed the thing around that has all your background on it, so I think people can read that. I'm not going to copy that, but I just wanted to share a little vignette of, it wasn't really my introduction, but I think a good example of what Curt is going to be talking to us about today. I think it was back in the year 1991. Our family was hosting an exchange student that year, and so we gathered a whole bunch of the exchange students and paid a visit to Grandpa Edmo. A lot of you remember Ed Edmo the Elder. This is Eddie and Casey's dad, and he was quite a figure in this community and a teller of stories. And the kids were sitting on the floor, and Grandpa Edmo told a story that went something like this. He said, one day Coyote was going along, and he found this stick. And he thought, oh, that would make a nice walking stick. So he put the stick on his lap, took out his knife, and he started carving. But as he was carving, the knife slipped, and he started bleeding. It slipped again, and he got a little slice of what looked like good red meat. He tasted it. It tasted pretty good. So he made another slice. And he ate some more. He made another slice, and he sliced until all he was a skeleton. Well, the story went on, and I think there was a redemption part at the end of it somehow, but the kids were fascinated, and I just thought, what a great way to talk about the human condition, about how we people sometimes are our own worst enemies and engage in self-destructive behaviors, and all through a coyote story. So it's out of that rich tradition, not only with our local and regional Native American people, but stories found all around the world that have fascinated Professor Curt Yehnert. Would you give him a welcome?
Thank you so much, Carl, and friends of the original courthouse in the Dalles. Just a quick word about the Oregon Council of Humanities. I don't understand myself why, what is happening to the Chautauqua program, but what I heard was that it's the most popular program that the council has, and yet an advisory board has recommended moving into a new direction. So they're going to try that, and I wouldn't really hope that it falls flat, but I do I do very much enjoy. I've been doing Chautauqua Talks for 11 years now, and I love coming to different communities in Oregon and meeting the people there. And I also really like getting out from behind my desk at Western Oregon and talking about things that I'm very passionate about. That's a very good thing for me, and I think it's a good thing for the communities as well. The Trickster is an enigmatic character in primarily mythic stories from many, many different cultures over vast reaches of time. The Chin people of British Columbia have a story that they tell about the trickster deity that they believe created them and made them human. And it's a story they tell called Coyote Bill's Canoe. Coyote was walking along the riverbank looking for food. And he came upon a beautiful lodge. And inside was an old widow woman and her beautiful young daughter. They invited him in. He sat down and began telling stories about what a great warrior he was. As he was telling his stories, he looked around, and everywhere he looked, he saw dried salmon. Dried salmon hanging from the lodge poles, and dried salmon in parfleche boxes stacked up along the side of the lodge. And when he finished telling his stories, he said, "Old woman, I will marry your daughter." She was pleased because she believed the stories he told about what a great warrior he was. That night, as he stretched out beside his new wife, he said, "Wife, I love you very much. Tomorrow, I'll go out and I'll find a big red cedar tree. I'll chop it down and I'll make a new canoe for your mother." Well, his wife was pleased to hear this. She went and told her mother right away what he had said. The next morning when Coyote woke up, the old woman had fixed him a big breakfast. And when he had eaten all he could hold, she handed him her axe. He went out, and after a while they heard the sound of chopping. The sound of chopping went on all through the morning and into the afternoon, and then all afternoon and into the evening. And finally they heard the sound of a great tree falling in the forest. Coyote came home late. It was dark. He was sweaty and trembling from the exertion of the day. He came in, and the old woman fixed him a big bowl of dried salmon soup. He ate all he could hold. That night, as he stretched out beside his new wife, he said, "Wife, I love you very much. When I finish this canoe, we'll take a trip. Your mother can sit in the bow, I'll sit in the stern, you can sit in the middle. We'll see great things." His wife was pleased to hear that, and she told her mother right away what he had said. The next morning, the old woman fixed him another big breakfast, and she handed him her axe. Coyote worked on that canoe all day long. They heard the sound of the axe chucking into the wood. He came home at night, sweaty, trembling with exhaustion. The next day he went out. This went on for 4 days, until finally the old woman said, "Daughter, I'm concerned about our food stores. They are getting low. I want you to find out how Coyote is coming with that canoe, how many more days it might take before he finishes it." So the daughter waited the next day until she heard the sound of the chopping, and then she followed it through the woods, silent as a deer. She came to a lush meadow, and in the center of that meadow was an old rotten cedar log. Coyote was sitting on one end of that log. He had a big stone in his hand, and he was banging that hollow log to make the sound of an axe chucking into wood. The daughter faded away, walked back as quietly as she could, told her mother everything that she had seen. And together they put the rest of their food into the old canoe, and they slipped it into the river, and they went away. When Coyote finished his work that evening, he walked back to the lodge. He thought he could almost smell that dried salmon soup in the air as he got close and poked his head inside the lodge, but all he saw inside were a few empty parfleche boxes and the dying embers of a fire. Coyote went on his way, walking along the riverbank, looking for food. That's what they say. Tricksters are almost always profane. They are not what we would call nice people. Their values seem to be just the opposite of whatever values tells their stories. And yet, they are something more than just antisocial or anti-religious, because in focusing our attention on the values that they are profaning, they focus our attention on our own values as well. Not everyone who plays tricks, though, is a trickster. I want to talk about three ancient Greek characters, all three who played tricks. The first was a person named Prometheus. Prometheus is the one that the Greeks credit with creating human beings, or actually I should say with creating men. He did not create women. Prometheus loved these little creatures that he had made and breathed life into. He taught them things. He taught them language first, and then he taught them metallurgy, taught them how to discern the stars, taught them medicine. And when they were presentable, there was a feast that was a feast of both the men and gods together. For the first time, there would be a sacrifice. And after the sacrifice, Prometheus presented Zeus with two bags. One would be the offering for the gods, and the other would be the offering for men. And in the one bag he held all of the choice meats of the ox that had been sacrificed. They were hidden inside the stomach. In the other bag, he took all of the bones of the ox and he wrapped them in fat, which he knew that Zeus loved. And he presented these two bags to Zeus, and he said, which shall be for men and which shall be for the gods? Zeus, of course, chose the one with the glistening fat, only to feel duped when the men got all the meat. And so Zeus said, all right, let men eat meat, but they'll have to eat it raw. And he hid all the fire. It used to be the fire ran in the limbs of trees, and all one would have to do is take two limbs and put them together and it would make fire. But he took the fire out of the trees. So Prometheus climbed up Mount Olympus, and he had with him a fennel stalk. He lit a torch on the sun, and then he broke off a cinder and he put it inside the fennel stalk, which had a very hard exterior and very pithy inside. And he kept the coal alive that way. He extinguished his torch and he went down and he gave fire back to humans. And he said, now go, let this go out. In punishment, Zeus chained him to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains. And every morning, an eagle would fly down and tear open his side and eat out his liver. And then, because he was immortal, it would regenerate slowly and painfully, but it would come back and the skin would finally just start to knit together and heal when that eagle would come by again and tear it open and eat his liver. Before he left for his punishment in the Caucasus Mountains, Prometheus, whose name is Forward Thinker, warned his brother. His brother was named Epimetheus, and this means backward thinker. Epimetheus was not the bright one of the family. But Prometheus warned him and said, don't accept any gifts from Zeus. Well, Zeus, who was not quite finished with his own tricks yet, called together all of the gods, and he asked Hephaestus, who was the god of metalworking, to create a woman, to make a beautiful woman that he would then breathe life into and present as a bride for Prometheus. She was adorned with all of the outer beauties that a woman can have, but inside she was not quite so pretty. And in this way she was something, she was like Zeus's sense of humor about the own gift that he had been given that had a pretty exterior and a not so pleasing interior. That was the gift that he returned, was Pandora. And Pandora he also gave a huge jar, a pithoi, full of the worst kinds of evils that you could think of, knowing, of course, that Pandora would not be able to resist opening a gift from Zeus and releasing all the ills. So that's Prometheus. He played tricks, but he is not really known as a trickster. There was another one who was less known, and his name was Sisyphus. Do you know who Sisyphus was? Sisyphus was the king of Corinth. Some say that he seduced Odysseus' mother on her wedding night, and that Sisyphus is the real father of Odysseus. Regardless of whether that's true or not, one day he saw something in the skies that was remarkable. He saw a giant eagle carrying a river nymph in its talons to an island. And the river nymph belonged to, it was the daughter of Aesopus, who was a river god. And so he went and told Aesopus what he had seen. And he said that he thought that it was Zeus in disguise, and it was. Well, Zeus, to get Sisyphus back, sent Death and said, drag him down to Hades. Sisyphus, however, had one fortunate accoutrement. He had an unbreakable chain. And he told Death that his chain was unbreakable. And Death said, no, it isn't. And so he chained Death up, and Death could not escape. And in the meanwhile, while Death was chained up, nothing could die. And all of the wars that people had were absolutely worthless because nobody died. So finally, Zeus sent Ares to get Death out of that predicament and to drag Sisyphus down to Hades. Well, Sisyphus knew that Death was coming, that Ares was coming. And so he told his wife, I'm about to die, and when I die, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to strip off my royal raiment and throw my body out in the street. She was horrified, but she promised that she would do that. And so he died, and she stripped off his royal raiment and threw his body into the street. And meanwhile, down in Hades, Sisyphus went up to Hades and he said, look at the shameful way this woman is treating my body. Let me go up there and teach her a lesson. And so Hades, who was equally outraged, said, all right, you do that. And he went back up, returned to his throne, put on his royal raiment, and refused to go back down to Hades, and eventually died an old man. When he died an old man, a special punishment, of course, was waiting for him. And most people who hear of Sisyphus know him only as the person who had to take that rock and roll it up the hill, only to have it roll back down again. And roll it up the hill, only to have it roll back down for eternity. That was his punishment. And he played tricks, of course, Sisyphus, but he was not really a trickster either. Hermes was a trickster. Hermes was best known as the messenger of Zeus. He is a trickster for a couple of qualities that he has that make him the oldest of tricksters in Western culture. One of those qualities is that he is paradoxical, meaning that he is often portrayed as both very young and very old simultaneously. He is often portrayed as both male and female simultaneously. He is the god not only of travel, but he's the god of commerce and the god of thieves, which is an odd combination. He is also marginal. This is another characteristic of tricksters. The Greeks had something that they called herms. These were stones that were squared off. They were about 4.5 feet tall, and they had the head of Hermes on the stone, and they put this at the crossroads. They also put this sometimes at the entrance to buildings of commerce in ancient Greece. Hermes was precocious. On the day that he was born, he stole his brother Apollo's cattle. These are the sacred cattle of Apollo that he kept on Peloponnese. He found them, and when he found them, he took off their clothes, and he put their clothes back on backwards. And he took his own sandals, and he turned them around, and then he walked them into a cave, so that when Apollo went looking for his cattle, he saw what looked like the cattle coming out of the cave and then disappearing into thin air. Well, in that cave, Hermes sacrificed 2 of the cattle. Each of the cows he separated into 6 portions, and each of these portions was for one of the gods, and the 12th portion he ate himself. At the time, there were only 11 gods, and so he was, of course, proclaiming himself to be the 12th. This is all on the day that he was born. Then he took the leather from one of the cows, and he had found a turtle shell on his way, and he stretched the leather, made it into strings, wove it into strings, and stretched it across the tortoise shell, and so invented the lyre. And he was playing the lyre when his brother Apollo finally found him. And he demanded his cattle back, and Hermes professed not to know what he was talking about. And then Apollo saw the woven string made from cowhide on the lyre, and he hauled Hermes up before Zeus and demanded satisfaction. Well, Zeus was listening to Apollo's story, and as he was listening to his story, Hermes climbed up on Zeus's throne and began mocking Zeus for his affair that he had with Maia, who was Hermes' mother, and imitating Zeus in such a way that Zeus, who was at first offended, even Zeus could not keep from laughing at the end at Hermes. And so, to show that there were no hard feelings, Hermes gave the lyre to Apollo, and it became known as, the lyre became associated with Apollo, much more than with Hermes. And he was forgiven for the 2 cows that he sacrificed. In the Middle Ages, there was a feast called Saturnalia. And Saturnalia was marked by a reversal of fortunes. So, for example, on that one day of Saturnalia, slaves would become slave masters, and slave masters would become slaves. This feast is associated with the trickster. It became, in later Middle Ages, something called the Feast of Fools, or the Feast of Misrule. And young people would take the most profane among them and make them a mock abbot or a mock pope, and then they would have all sorts of crazy little pranks that they would play on that day. One day only, and the church allowed this, but for only one day. The idea of the trickster is related also to the court jester. The court jester was the symbolic twin of the king. And in a time when societies did not have freedom of speech, and when someone could be beheaded for saying the wrong thing to the king, the jester could get away with saying anything he wanted. And the reason for this was because, by definition, everything he said was a jest. And this has come down in notions of a trickster, who is almost always a smaller creature, a more vulnerable creature than others, who must live by his wits. And I say his rather than his or her, because there are almost no female tricksters in cultures. I don't know why that is, but trickster is almost always male. In Native American traditions, the trickster is known for two things. One, a kind of a bumbling ineptitude, and two, a voracious appetite for both food and sex. And most tricksters in Native American cultures are also the smaller of the animals, or the less of the ferocious animals. Think of coyote, or think of spider in the Lakota tradition, or hare in the southeastern tribes. In West Africa, there are tribes that tell trickster stories. In fact, trickster stories are the most common stories told in West Africa. In Ghana, for example, they tell stories about a trickster named Anansi, who is the spider. And they have professional storytellers that tell their sacred histories and their sacred stories, but anybody can tell a trickster story. You just have to start off by saying, this story is not true, and then you proceed to tell the story. So I'll tell a story that they tell in Ghana, called Coyote Defeats Hates to Be Contradicted. This story is not true. There was a man once named Hates to Be Contradicted, who hated to be contradicted so much that he went off to live by himself in a village all alone. One day, a giraffe came to visit him, and they sat down under a palm nut tree. And as they were talking, the palm nuts fell down. The giraffe said, "Father, hate to be contradicted, your palm nuts are ripe." And Hate to Be Contradicted said, "Yes, it always happens this way. They ripen in threes. And when they ripen and fall, I take 3 of the palm nuts and boil them to extract the oil. And when I get 3 pots full of oil, I take them to Akasi and I buy an old woman. And I bring her back, and the old woman gives birth to my grandmother. And then my grandmother gives birth to my mother, and then my mother gives birth to me while I am standing there." The giraffe said, "As for all that, you lie." And Hate to Be Contradicted took a stick and beat him in the head until he died. The next day, an antelope came and sat down under Father Hate to Be Contradicted's palm nut trees, and the same thing happened. The palm nuts fell, and the stories ensued, and at the end of the story, the antelope said, "As for all that, you lie." And Father Hate to Be Contradicted took a stick and beat him as well until he died. And so on with all of the animals, until finally Anansi took his bag and his cloth, and he put his cloth over his shoulder, and he went to visit Father Hate to Be Contradicted. They greeted each other, and they sat down under the palm nut tree, and the palm nuts fell down, and Anansi took the palm nuts and put them in his bag. And then some more fell down, and Anansi said, "Father, Hate to Be Contradicted, your palm nuts are ripe." And Hate to Be Contradicted told him the same story. And at the end of it, Anansi said, "You are right. You do not lie. As for me, on my farm I have okras, and the okras grow so tall that even if I link 77 hooked poles together, I cannot reach to the top of them. So what I do is I lie on my back, and I stretch out my arm." He didn't really say arm, but this is a mixed audience. And so you'll have to use your imagination. I stretch out my arm, and then I'm able to harvest it. Father, hate to be contradicted, said, tomorrow I'd like to see that. I'll come to your house and take a look. And so Anansi said, I'll be happy to welcome you. And as he walked home, he took some of the palm nuts and he chewed them up and he spit out the oil. I don't know if you've ever seen palm nut oil, it's orangish red. He spit it out along the path. And when he got home, he told his son, there is a man who is going to come see me tomorrow. And I want you to tell him when he gets here that I am not here because my arm broke in 7 places and it had to be taken to the blacksmith and repaired. And it started to be repaired yesterday and finished being repaired today, and that's where my father is. You tell him that. And so the boy said that he would. And the next day, when Father, hate to be contradicted, came by, he saw the boy and he said, where's your father? And the boy told him the story. The boy said, didn't you see the blood on the path? And hate to be contradicted and said, yes, I did see that blood on the path. And so he said, where is your mother? And the boy said, my mother went to the spring yesterday to draw some water. And the water pot slipped out of her hands and almost fell. And she started to catch it, but she didn't finish catching it yesterday. And so she came back today. She went back today to finish the job. Hate to be contradicted, still didn't say anything. And then the Nansi came. And he ordered the boy to make stew for the visitor. And the boy made a stew. He put in a tremendous amount of really hot peppers and only 1 small fish. And when Father, hate to be contradicted, began eating the stew, he said, my mouth is on fire. And he asked the boy for some water. The boy went and he fetched the water pot, but he didn't fetch any water. And so Father, hate to be contradicted, asked again, get me some water, boy. And the boy said, the water that we have here is of 3 kinds. My father's water is on top. The water belonging to my mother's co-wife is in the middle. And my mother's water is in the very bottom of the creek. I have to be careful in how I draw it, or I might cause a tribal dispute. Father, hate to be contradicted, said, you little brat, you lie. And Anansi said to his son, get a stick and beat him until he is dead. Father, hate to be contradicted, said, why should he beat me until I'm dead? And Anansi said, because you will not stand for contradiction in others, and yet you contradict others. For that you must die. And so the boy killed him. And Anansi cut up his body, and he strewed it along all throughout all of the tribal peoples in Ghana. And that is how contradiction came among the Ghana people. It's a strange story, as many trickster stories are. And yet, it really is a story that is about how humans will live. It's a struggle between hate to be contradicted and the Nansi for determining how humans will find themselves. There is one type, hate to be contradicted, who cannot stand anything to go against what he says. And so that very rigidity and inability to accept contradiction drives him out by himself in a village all alone. He cannot even accept the natural world as seen by the animals coming out and trying to be welcoming. He cannot stand even these overtures from the natural world, and so he is alone. And then there's Anansi, who is at home in the natural world, is at home with his family, is very much at home with contradiction and disorder and messiness. This is what Anansi is all about. Disorder and messiness and contradiction. And proclaiming by sowing this contradiction among all peoples that will be our lot as well. That is how we will live and find meaning. Not in the disorder itself, but in coming up with order and form out of that messiness and contradiction. you know, many slaves were brought over through the Herald Middle Passage of the Atlantic and made slaves here in this country. And many times the only possessions that they had were the stories that they knew. And of course they knew quite a few Anansi stories. These tended to change a little when they got here. For example, in South Carolina, Anansi became Aunt Nancy. I don't know how that happened, but it didn't change the character at all. But it's just Aunt Nancy instead of Anansi. But there's a story that they tell in Jamaica that is an Anansi story. It's called My Father's Old Riding Horse. Tiger and Anansi liked the same two girls, but Tiger was not as clever. He was, however, very good looking, and he would go see these girls every Sunday, and he would spend time with them. And Anansi was aware that the girls were starting to become sweet on Tiger. And so he happened to let it slip one day that Tiger, he said, you know, girls, Tiger is just my father's old riding horse. And the girl said, oh, is that true? And he said, it's hard to believe, but it's true. Next Sunday, I'll show you what I mean. And so he went back home. The next Sunday, Tiger came to visit the girls. And the girls told him what Anansi had said. And so Tiger went off in a storm looking for Anansi. And he banged on Anansi's door. And Anansi said, who is it? And she was very sick and weak. Tiger said, you know who it is. Let me in. Anansi said, please just open the door and come in. I'm too sick to get out of bed. Tiger said, why did you tell those girls I'm just your father's old riding horse? I demand that you go back there right now and tell them that you lied about me. Anansi said, I would love to, but I'm too weak to do that. Tiger thought about it for a minute. He said, if I put you on my back, would you go then? And Anansi said, for you, I would do it. So he started off on Tiger's back, but he fell off after a couple of steps, and he said, I'm too weak, I have to get my saddle. The Tiger said, well, hurry up and get it. So Anansi got the saddle and saddled up Tiger, climbed back on, and he went just a little further, and he fell off again. Anansi said, I'm afraid I'll have to get my spurs. So Tiger said, well, hurry up, be quick with it. Anansi got his spurs and put them on. He also brought the bridle. Tiger said, what's that for? Anansi said, it's to keep from falling off. So Tiger allowed himself to be bridled. They got pretty close to the girl's house, and they were going through a wood, and Anansi said, here, let me just cut a whip so that I can touch your flank and tell you when to slow down. So Tiger said, all right, go ahead. Let's just get on with it. And he cut a whip, and they were almost to the girl's yard when he juked the Tiger with his spurs and whipped him really hard, and Tiger let out a yelp and flew across the yard. And as he was galloping across the yard, Anansi was waiting to the girls on the porch. And then he jumped off and he said, you see, girls, Tiger's not only my father's old riding horse, he's also mine. If you perceive a difference, a subtle difference in the character of Anansi from Ghana to Jamaica, you'll understand the difference between a trickster who is primarily a culture hero, meaning someone who brings good gifts to humankind, as opposed to someone who is more just a prankster and a joker. He has become, in America, Anansi has become a joker and a prankster, whereas in Ghana he is much more a culture hero. How am I doing on time? when they tell stories about death, or how death entered into the world, or why death is permanent, the trickster has some central role to play. For example, in Polynesia, they had a god called Maui, a trickster god. And Maui wanted to find out one day if it would be possible for humans to live forever and to not die. And he was told, after much divination, that if he were to enter into the body of Hinenui-Tepo while she was sleeping, Hinenui-Tepo is the guardian of death. If he could enter into her body while she was sleeping and come out her mouth without having her wake up, then humans could live forever. And so, to find Hinenui-Tepo, Maui had to enlist the help of some very small birds, little tiny birds, and they accompanied him and showed him where this great goddess was and where she was sleeping. And Maui, in order to enter into her, had to remove all his clothes. He had to do it very carefully and quietly, and he told the birds, now don't put her or tweet or anything, because then she'll wake up, and then she'll kill me, and then humans will die. And so he started to enter her, but he looked so funny doing it that one of the little birds just puffed out his cheeks trying to keep a laugh in, and at the last moment couldn't do it, and let out a single laugh. And Hinenui-Tepo woke up and saw Maui, squeezed her muscles together and crushed her and killed her. And that's why humans die. And do you know the story of Loki and Balder? Do you know Loki, Frigg and Odin? I'm sorry? Norwegian, but Old Norse. That's the word I was looking for. Old Norse. Thank you. The Old Norse trickster named Loki. These gods, the Old Norse gods, are really something. If you ever get a chance to study their mythology, wow! And the amount that they drank and the amount that they killed, and it was just a real wide open, rusty kind of place. And they all stayed up in this place together, and they were called the Aesir. These are the gods of the old Norwegians. And there was one god among them who was not quite like they were. He was not only beautiful, but he was also very, very good. He was like the epitome of goodness. And for some of those gods, they didn't have much goodness to look forward to in their own selves, but he was something else. And his name was Balder. But one day, Balder began having these terrifying dreams that he was about to die. And he told these dreams to the Aesir. And the Aesir were panicked. They did not want Balder to die. And so Freya, who was Odin's wife, Odin was the leader of this group, she went around to everything on earth and she extracted a promise that it would not hurt Balder. She went all of the minerals, all of the animals, all of the reptiles, all of the plants, absolutely everything. She extracted a promise that it would not hurt Balder until everything on earth had promised. And so she proclaimed that Balder was safe. And to test it, one of the gods took out a sword and whacked at Balder's arm, and nothing happened. And then, as entertainment, they would stand Balder up in front of them, and they would shoot arrows and throw hatchets and do everything they could think of, and nothing happened to Balder. Well, Loki, who was the trickster, happened to see this one day, and he didn't like it. He thought there was something terribly wrong with this. And so he disguised himself as an old woman, and he went up to Freya. He said, "Did you really get a promise from everything?" And Freya said, "Well, there was a little mistletoe that grows west of Valhalla. It was so young and innocent and it couldn't hurt anything, so I didn't extract a promise from that. So immediately the old woman disappeared. And pretty soon Loki was seen west of Valhalla digging up that mistletoe. And he brought it into the assembly. And Odin's brother was standing on the outskirts of the assembly doing nothing. The reason was he was blind. And so he never threw anything at Balder. And Loki went up to, and his name was Hod. And he said, Hod, why aren't you throwing something at Balder? And Hod said, well, there's two reasons. One, I'm blind, and two, I don't have anything to throw. And Loki said, here's something for you to throw, and I'll even direct you how to throw it. And he turned him so that he was facing Balder, and took his arm and tossed the mistletoe, and it went right through Balder, and Balder fell down dead. This was the greatest tragedy that had befallen the gods. And eventually, Freya convinced one of them, I'll think of his name in a moment, to capture Sleipnir, who was Odin's eight-legged horse, and to go down to Hel and see if they could bring Balder back. Hel, for the Old Norse, it was spelled H-E-L, and it was run by an old hag woman who was also named Hel, H-E-L. And so, what is his name? Hermod the Brave, captured Sleipnir, and he rode his horse 8 days down into the depths of darkness, and he crossed this uncrossable bridge, and he finally arrived at the gates of Hell, and he tightened up that stirrup under him, and he leaped the castle walls, and he landed right at the great gathering hall, and he saw Balder sitting there, and he went to Hell, and he said, all of the upper world is crying out for Balder to come home. Will you please let me take Balder back with me? And Hel said, is everything crying out? And Hermod said, yes, everything is crying out for Balder to return. And Hel said, well, if you can get everything to cry at once for Balder to return, then I will release him and you can have him back. And they went around then, all of the gods, they went around to all the world and they tried to get everybody to cry at the same time. All of the trees, all of the plants, all of the minerals, and they got almost everything to cry. They were on their way back. There was just this one little cave that they hadn't explored. They looked in there, and there was a giant woman. She gave her name as Thok. And they said, will you cry Balder out of Hell? And Thok said, let Hell keep what she has. It turns out that Thok was really Loki in disguise. But that's why Balder remained in Hell. Okay, keep that story of Maui and the bird in mind, and this story of Loki, and I want to tell one more story that I think is related. This is a Nez Perce story. This story was collected by a Nez Perce guy named Archie Finney, very close to the turn of the century. He collected it from his grandmother. He was Nez Perce, and he was educated at Columbia University. And he wrote a terrific book of Nez Perce tales, and this is in that book. It's called Coyote Visits the Land of the Shadow People. Can I take this off? Two things I should tell you before I tell this story. One is, there's some amazing similarities between this story and another story, a Greek myth called Orpheus. It was the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Do you know that story? He was a beautiful singer, and on their wedding day, she was running across the meadow to the wedding pavilion. A serpent bit her on the heel, and she died in his arms. And he went down to Hades, and he sang his way through Hades and sang in front of Hades himself. And Hades finally said, well, you go ahead. You want your wife? Go ahead, take her back. Just, she's going to be behind you. Don't turn around and look at her until you get to the overworld. And he was almost there, and he turned and looked, and she was gone. The other thing I need to tell you is that I know some of you have asked about Coyote stories, so I assume you know Coyote. He was married to a woman named Mole, but he was kind of an enthusiastic adulterer most of his life. But he did finally come to understand and to deeply love his wife at the end of his days. And anyway, this story happens right after that. They were in a village then, and Mole became sick, and she died. Coyote wept for 4 days. Finally, the death spirit came, and he said, "Coyote, are you weeping for your wife?" Coyote said, "Yes, friend, I miss her very much." The death spirit said, "If you're able to imitate my actions perfectly, do everything that I do, it might be possible for me to take you to see your wife. Would you like that?" Coyote said, "Yes, friend, what are we waiting for?" And so they began a journey over 5 mountains to the east. They crossed the first mountain on the first day, and the death spirit was almost like a shadow beside Coyote. He could hardly see him, but he could see where the grass bent down where he walked. And they camped on the far side at the end of the first day. The second day, they crossed the second mountain, and the death spirit was a little bit more in his body. He could see the outline. Coyote could see the outline, and he could see his bony arm when he pointed it out to the south, and he said, "Look at that dust. Looks like a roundup." Coyote looked. He couldn't see any dust, but he said, "Looks like a roundup." On the third day, when they crossed the third mountain, the death spirit was even more in his body. And he pulled down a branch of service berries that Coyote couldn't see. And he said, "Service berries, it's good we found these. We should eat some." Coyote pretended to eat these berries that he couldn't see. They crossed the fourth mountain on the fourth day. The death spirit was completely in his body now. And the fifth mountain, the tallest mountain of all. And then they came to a broad, lush, beautiful meadow. And the death spirit said, "Wait here, I'll find out where your wife is." So Coyote sat down and he waited. Pretty soon the death spirit came back and he said, "Come with me, and remember, do everything that I do." And he walked to the middle of this meadow, and he seemed to lift up this invisible flap as if to a longhouse. And then he ducked, and he went and he sat down. Coyote pretended to lift up the flap and ducked and sat down. The death spirit said, "Eat. Your wife has brought us food." Coyote couldn't see anything in front of him, but he pretended to eat. And finally the death spirit said, "Things are different here. In the daytime, you can't see. But at nighttime, you'll see." And then he left. Coyote sat right where he was, and he watched the sun course across the sky and begin to set in the west. The tall prairie grasses all around him, and as the sun began to set, the wind picked up and moved through the grasses in a way that sounded almost like voices that were far away. And then as the sun set, Coyote thought he saw fire flickering in front of him. And then, when it was dark, he saw that there was a line of fires as far as he could see, stretched out in front of him and behind him. And then he noticed that there were people walking all around, and that he was in an immense longhouse. And then he looked beside him and he saw his wife. Well, they both jumped up, and he put his arms around her, and he told her all the things that he had meant to tell her before she passed. And they spent half the night in each other's arms. And then she said, "Come, let me show you." And she took him around to the longhouse and showed him all his friends who had passed on before him. And they sat and talked and sang songs, and they gambled. And they had a fabulous evening until the sun rose from the east, and then they started to fade away, and the fires began to fade, and then Coyote was sitting in the middle of an empty meadow. And he sat right there. He was thirsty, but he didn't go get something to drink. He was hungry, but he didn't go find something to eat. He just sat there and he watched the sun course across that sky. And he watched it set, and then the grasses started to tremble. And then the people started to come back, and he was sitting beside his wife. He spent 4 of the happiest nights of his life in that lodge. And then the death spirit came and he said, "Coyote, it's time to go back." Coyote said, "I'm not going back." The death spirit said, "Nevertheless, you are going back." Coyote said, "No, my wife is here. My friends are here. I like it here. I'm going to stay here." The death spirit said, "Coyote, if you're able to do on the way back everything that we did here, it might be possible for you to take your wife back with you. Would you like that?" Coyote said, "Yes, I would." The death spirit said, "But I have to warn you, you cannot touch her until you cross the 5th mountain. If you touch her before you cross the 5th mountain, she will disappear and you will never see her again." Coyote looked at his wife, and his wife looked at him, and she said, "Friend, what are we waiting for?" And they began the journey. They crossed that first mountain, and his wife was like a shadow beside him. He could hardly see her, but he could see where the grass bent down where she walked. And they camped on the far side, and then the next night they crossed the next mountain. And Coyote pointed to the south, and he said, "Look at that dust. It looks like a roundup." And she said, "Yes, it looks like a roundup." They crossed the 3rd mountain, and she was even more in her body now. She was almost substantial. And Coyote pulled down the invisible branch, and he said, "Service berries, you should have some of these." And she ate some of the service berries. They crossed the 4th mountain on the 4th day, and she was fully in her body again, but in a way that Coyote hadn't seen her in years. She was healthy and happy, and she was humming a little song as she made camp. The Coyote made the fire, and they sat there and they ate their little supper. And she was talking about what life would be like in the village for them now. And she was so happy that a little tear coursed down her cheek. And it caught the firelight. Coyote saw her face and had never seen anything so beautiful. And he jumped up and he put his arms around her. And as soon as he did, she was gone. He howled. And immediately the death spirit was there, and he said, "Coyote, you fool. You were about to set the precedent for humans to bring their loved ones back from the dead, and you couldn't do it. You couldn't follow simple directions." And then he left. Coyote turned his face to the west where his village was, and he thought about walking that trail by himself, and he couldn't do it. He decided that he didn't care what the death spirit said. He was going to find his wife anyway. And so he turned to the east. And he started that very night. He started walking. He crossed that mountain. And when he got to the top of it, he pulled the service berries down. He said, "Service berries, it's good I found these." And he said, "Yes, it's good I found these." And he crossed the next mountain. And he said, "Looks like a roundup." And he answered himself, "Yes, it looks like a roundup." And he was walking fast now. And he crossed that last mountain, and he found the meadow just as it was, as he remembered it. And he found exactly where he was sitting. And he sat right down in that same spot, and he waited. He watched the sun course across the sky. And he waited for the voices in the grasses. And instead, all he heard was the wind rushing through. And he started to look around as it got dark, and all he saw were stars. He sat there all night, and in the morning he was still sitting there, listening to the meadowlarks sing. That's what they say. Getting old. Yes, it is sad. That's a sad story, I know.
You hear better than I do.
like that story a lot because I'm not Native American, but I like learning about their culture. It's hard for me to learn about other people's cultures. I don't know about you guys, but other cultures seem so strange, and it's hard for me to feel like, like I know them from the inside out, like I feel like I know ours. But this story seems to tell me a lot about their understanding of death and why it's permanent. And for that, it's a really worthwhile story to think about. On the surface, of course, it's almost comical, especially if you know Coyote and his predilections. His dilemma, his paradox is this, that if he loves his wife so little that he can resist her, then she'll return and be his forever. If he loves his wife so much that he can't resist her, then he can't have her. But I think it goes even deeper than that. Or at least, I think the paradox goes deeper than that. And if you have children, this might be easier to understand. But you can rephrase the paradox this way, that you can never really know the value of anything until you can't hold it. If you can hold something and keep it and possess it, then it loses value for us. I don't know why that is, but it seems to work that way. If you think about your own family, and think if you were around the dinner table and you realized, and they all realized that you would never die and they would never die, then how important and how valuable would they be to you? Less, I think. It is the fact of their death that makes their lives poignant. Every day when I leave my wife, we kiss each other, we tell each other we love each other, because we don't know. You don't know. And that poignancy would be completely gone if she would last forever and I would last forever. You understand what I'm saying? There was an old Blackfoot woman who said once that people die so that other people will feel sorry for each other. Anyway, that's all I know about the Trickster. Yes?
Do these cultures understand the stories that way, or is this just a foreign culture trying to make sense out of those stories?
It's an excellent question to ask, and I don't know the answer to it, but I do know that some people in their culture do seem to see the stories that way, and they talk about the stories that way. So I'm guessing it's much like our own culture, that some people think about and reflect on the things that give our culture value and meaning, and other people don't. And so I think the people that really think about these stories see these lessons in them.
Like this last story was easier to get hooked by, but some of those previous stories kind of left me
Sure.
hanging there.
Right. I understand that. Yeah. Other questions?
Your introduction about, I know the story isn't true. The way I always understood that introduction was, I don't know if it happened this way, but I know the story is true. Have you heard that?
I have not heard that, no.
I heard that with some of the native stories.
Huh. That's interesting. Can you say that again one time? I don't know
I don't know if it really happened this way, but I know
that the story is true. I like that.
Depends on the details.
Yes?
As bawdy as some of the stories are, the Native American trickster tales, was there an intended audience?
Yes.
I mean, or were the tales told to everyone?
They were told to everyone. And some of the bawdiest ones were told especially to children, because what is being taught in those tales are lessons that young men, very young men, need to know. Yeah. You look so familiar to me.
I was a student here.
Well, no kidding.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Gabe Judah.
Oh, I remember the name.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
So in '97, I took every class of yours that I could get. My girlfriend, who's my wife now, also was Courtney Saldivar.
Yes, yes. Oh, wow. Are you teaching up here? Or?
Yeah, I teach in the river.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
We'll turn on the trickster here.
Did you pass?
He passed, yeah. He did real well. In my memory, he did real well.
Is the term, you mentioned the story about Pandora. Is that where the term Pandora's box?
Yes, it is. With that term, and it has come in our culture. I don't know why this is, but as a box, Pandora's box. But it was actually a jar. It was called a pithoi, which they used. It was about 6 feet tall and had a lip around it, and they used it for storing grain and oil and wine. And that's what Zeus set down with her.
And the one about Balder,
Yes.
that doesn't have anything to do with the term balderdash, does it? That may be totally different spelling.
I don't know.
It does.
It does?
Yeah, there's a big race. Behind the entire story. That's the Balder.
That's the balderdash. Wow.
We shortened it to just a bunch of balderdash because basically he was racing on bees.
Huh. That's great. Any other questions? Well, yes.
You mentioned some of these stories involve death.
Yes.
I know some of the trickster tales, don't they also involve creation tales?
Yes, they do.
Is that true in other cultures as well?
Yes.
Trickster features in creation.
Yes, Trickster often features in creation and in death. Those two. Yeah.
Not long for that too.
Right. Yes. Often not only the creation of the earth, but the creation of people as well. Well, thank you so much for your time.